Back when you used to rely on your telephone system as a key armory within IT, people had limited ways of communicating with each other. It wasn't so prolific with SMS and with IM and with channels and all these different platforms. But the reality is now that enterprise voice and voice generally is benefiting from the capabilities of all these different services that are all sort of sat at the same level. And so it's less necessarily about an argument saying, I've got more features on more traditional telephone system versus Teams. It's more about actually, I want them all sat side by side, and I want to be able to just choose them more seamlessly between the different types of communications, rather than necessarily always picking up voice, but having that ability to transition very easily.
Technology has transformed how we live, work, and connect. And behind that change are visionary people with bold ideas. Welcome to the Bridgecast, where host Scott Kinka explores hybrid work, AI, and our evolving future with tech's brightest minds. Presented by Bridgepoint Technologies, the nation's leading tech advisory firm. Experience a better way. The Bridgepoint way.
Hi. By 2030, the cloud communications market is projected to double, with the UCaaS market alone expected to reach $172.7 billion, according to Global Newswire. Yet, despite this growth, enterprise voice remains, I think, one of the most understood and underinvested parts of the modern tech stack. My guest today says that voice isn't dying, it's just evolving. Welcome to the Bridgecast. Today, I'm joined by Alistair Pidd. He's the Professional Services Director at Pure IP, a company trusted by global enterprises to power voice across platforms, regions, and cloud environments. We're exploring the hidden complexity of enterprise telephony, particularly in the Microsoft ecosystem, how Teams Phone is maturing in the enterprise, and why voice remains a mission-critical application in the hybrid workplace. Alistair brings 20 plus years of experience leading technical operations and enterprise voice strategy at companies like Server Center and Azuri Communications. But at Pure IP, he helps organizations modernize global voice architecture while keeping things simple, adding control and user experience, and keeping that front and center. He was also involved as a development partner with Microsoft and his team on Operator Connect. And Pure IP also boasts the largest reach globally amongst the partners within the Microsoft Operator Connect ecosystem. And we'll tell you a little bit more about what that means in a few minutes. Alistair, we've just shared your impressive resume written by our team. I'm sure you were blushing. But before we dig in, tell us a bit about you personally outside of work, outside of enterprise voice. What do you do outside of Pure IP?
Sure. So I'm a family guy. So I've got two kids, both teenagers. So they're both finishing school, and the other one's at catering college. We've got multiple pets in the house. We've got a couple of British bulldogs. If anyone likes those, and we've got a bearded dragon as well. So a little bit eclectic.
Do the bulldogs and the bearded dragon get along? Because they're not small, a bearded dragon, right?
No, it's not small, but it's not very angry, and the bulldogs are very passive also. So yeah, I think they're all just fighting for a space in the sun, really. So, but yeah, no, they all get along quite well.
Sounds like an interesting dinner table in your home. No, I appreciate that. Alistair, let's talk about Pure IP for a moment. So for those of you who may not be familiar, just kind of exactly what you do, the strategic role you play, this is your opportunity to give us a little bit of an elevator pitch on Pure IP.
Where Pure IP works really well is that we've got a global suite of voice sort of PSTN services that allows flexibility and scale. So you can come and pick from our suite of different voice services to align to your own strategy and really run that yourself, like pick our Operator Connect services, or direct routing, or WebEx, or any of the other various ones. Or you can really come to us and we can fully scope, deploy and manage the environment for you. We're particularly good in a multinational sort of environment, so a global reach sort of scenario, and also probably also equally as good where the cloud meets the on-premise. So the on-premise it hasn't gone yet. We still need to keep things on-prem, but how you balance that and how you put some things in the cloud, some things on-prem, and make the whole thing work together, that's the key. And that's where we do well.
And while I sort of teased Microsoft Teams in the open, the reality of it is you're in the Teams ecosystem. You're powering WebEx as well with enterprise voice solutions. Are you engaged with any other platforms like that?
Yes. Where this all starts is with our what we call our global voice network, and what we're able to do is consolidate PSTN replacement services around the globe. So we've got around 50 different countries where we can do that PSTN replacement. But then we've worked quite heavily with Microsoft, with Cisco, with Zoom to consolidate those services straight into those cloud platforms, because it's immediately available for customers who want to go to that sort of single platform UC cloud platform, and they want to go with PSTN services. They can really do that quite seamlessly. It varies a little bit between say Teams and WebEx and Zoom as to how that's been achieved, because they've gone down different paths. But yeah, it's all sat on the same network, so really just interfacing at different points.
Gotcha. So really what you're helping companies do is sort of rationalize in a lot of ways this post-COVID move to online collaboration systems and the enterprise voice that they historically had, merging those together, making those platforms, an enterprise voice tool, not just a meetings and collaboration tool. Fair description?
Yeah, exactly. I think we're particularly helping companies with the reach of the PSTN if they want to consolidate it, and then secondly, probably dealing with the complexity that kind of moving from old to new really throws up.
So before we continue on the tech. Let me finish one more on you. And I always ask this question of all of our guests. So you've worked in operations, you've worked in engineering, you've worked in consulting. You were kind of almost on I may be overstating it, but, operated on the launch team, if you will, with Microsoft for Operator Connect, and you were involved in that. I mean, you've been involved in a lot of things, but if you had to distill it down to one thing, what's your superpower as an IT leader?
I'm not sure about one thing. I think my own, I suppose, successes, if you like, are based in maybe a couple of things or two or three things coming together. I think when I started out in the industry, it was in data, in Cisco data, and I kind of moved that in towards voice and did multiple platforms. So I kind of combined both a voice and data viewpoint of things, which kind of worked quite well as I moved through my career, because everything started consolidating. Everything started becoming data one way or the other. So I kind of combined that with also hopping between multiple vendors. I never really stayed with Cisco or Microsoft or any of those. I sort of jumped about them, and then probably wrapping all around that in terms of who I am is I've worked for a few different companies that were doing managed services, hosted services, but it kind of meant that I got the full reach of different types of customers and different sized of companies and that kind of stuff. So I think it's not necessarily a superpower, but that's really what's driven where I've gone with things, and it sort of seems to set me up quite well for the industry as we know it now.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost a direct correlation to what it is that Pure IP does in a lot of ways, which is kind of the conversation that we're going to get into now. So, I quote this a lot, but there was a Gartner report. I don't recall the exact one. It was sort of right after COVID that said that businesses increased their investment in the broader, communications collaboration category to include enterprise voice, but also, the meetings and collaboration platforms by 30%. And we meet with customers at Bridgepoint Technology. We meet with customers every day to help them, better procure, manage, and implement services. And this is the question we get asked. I think I personally get asked the most frequently, right? Which is oh, now we're back. We're sort of in hybrid. I still have a phone system that these people love. I have features there. I really want to make this work with Team or Zoom or whatever those platforms may be. I mean, what's the reality on the ground right now in terms of kind of unifying this? What's happening with CIOs? Where are they succeeding, and kind of where are the friction points still?
The reality is that some of the features that were used, maybe specifically with telephony, some of the features that were used in telephony have changed a little bit, and people's usage of telephony has changed a little bit. Back when you used to rely on your telephone system as a key armory within IT. people had limited ways of communicating with each other. It wasn't so prolific with SMS and with IM and with channels and all these different platforms. But the reality is now that enterprise voice and voice generally is benefiting from the capabilities of all these different services that are all sort of sat at the same level. And so it's less necessarily about an argument saying, I've got more features on my more traditional telephone system versus Teams. It's more about actually, I want them all sat side by side, and I want to be able to just choose them more seamlessly between the different types of communications, rather than necessarily always picking up voice, but having that ability to transition very easily. So I think that is quite a compelling argument for getting people to use Teams in terms of making things easy for them. They don't necessarily have to jump to a third-party app in Teams, or they don't necessarily have to jump to a physical phone on a desk or a different phone system to actually make that communications. It's quite seamless and intuitive. Whether you choose like WebEx or Zoom or Teams, they do make things quite intuitive to get multiple things done and to converge things into people's viewpoints, so that they can just make those communications a lot more easily. So I think there's plenty of people taking a viewpoint that actually telephony's changed and the feature sets are different. So the cloud is very much ready with those kind of feature sets. But there's also, I think, from a business perspective, companies like Microsoft and Cisco specifically have had these product lines and services into these companies growing for a number of years now. So if you were to look at Microsoft, it's a no-brainer for a lot of different companies, because they've been building up those enterprise license stacks, the E3s, the E5s, and it's all been sat on directory services now for years, and all that's been building up and converging in the cloud. And now to really just activate Teams voice seems like quite a small bit to really just layer on top to take advantage of all those directory services and things that we've been running. And a similar thing from Cisco, if you've spent your time developing a Cisco strategy and making all your voice and data work together and utilizing certain bits of hardware together with the cloud, it just feels like you're more naturally able to jump into those cloud services and take and get the benefit of like consolidation, of scale, cost benefits. It just those couple of areas I think are really making it very, very easy to jump into all of this now.
Yeah, I think you probably already answered my next question, which was basically, how do you do this how do you move to a more consolidated platform without breaking what already works? What still works kind of in the legacy enterprise scenario? Is it that you try to replace those? Is it that, feature sets? Is that you try to have them migrated to something new? Is that you try to have them live next to each other in this hybrid world? I mean, there's still very much, kind of legacy voice workflows, if you will, right? That can be, pseudo replicated, but like we're not doing squared key set emulation inside of Teams. You know what I mean? So like how best to sort of, make the transition without breaking what's still working in the business, in your mind?
What we generally see with this kind of thing is that you're right. If you were to look at the entire sort of landscape of unified communications, you might see the enterprise telephony system, you might see meeting rooms and AV sort of systems, you might see call recording, contact centers, wallboards, all these kind of things. And if you look at it all together, you almost never move. What companies have particularly been doing, and especially if you were to take like the COVID years as an example, is assessing really the estate more widely, but identifying the quick wins. So if you were to look at sites that maybe have only really a sort of a base level of telephony function, it might be office or back office. It might just be simply people that don't necessarily need to use physical handsets. They don't necessarily have a factory with DECT or analogs, and really to sort of take the quick wins. So move that stuff across. But you are right. You need to keep a bit of a view on how some of this stuff is migrating or is coexisting at least. And actually, it's not as difficult as you might think trying to make some of the old and new services coexist anymore. There's lots of different companies out there that can do sort of cloud services for like SIP, or there's actually integration capabilities in Teams now that allow you to move to some of these different cloud services, or actually just connect back and leverage your old ones. So you sort of the best way is to develop a strategy of defining what's out there, so that you know what you're going to come across, but take the quick wins whilst you've got your sort of other eye on things that are slightly more complex. That's going to be a sort of next step. That's the kind of way that I think about it anyway.
Makes sense. I mean, you've mentioned Zoom, you've mentioned WebEx, you've mentioned Teams, right? Zoom is a service provider in and of themselves. They will talk to a customer and they will work with them. You know, I look at Cisco and Teams more like platforms, but you know, there were Cisco calling plans. I believe that there still are. Obviously, you can get dial tone and a base calling plan from Microsoft. You know, what makes a BCM One, with Pure IP, which I should probably explain that. I'll come back to that in a minute. But what makes Pure IP, so important when these providers all, frankly, if we're being honest, can provide dial tone on their own? Where do you fit in, and why is this, a healthy business for you and a solution for customers?
I guess the starting point there, the calling plans, all the different platforms have them, and I wouldn't really knock them, to be honest. If you're wanting to do something quite easily, quite quickly, you wanted to maybe limit the integration that you have to make with other companies and partners and things like that, then great. So that they're simplistic, they're very easy to deploy. But the bits where they maybe start to come unstuck a little bit is that you have a sort of limited or more limited coverage. It always expands out over time. Microsoft have actually got quite a decent coverage with their calling plans. It's very much a sort of out of the box kind of solution. What you're really trying to do is have something fairly bare bones and to enable it quite quickly and quite easily. You don't always get the flexibility that you might want. So, for instance, in terms of the wide Pure IP and BCM, for starters, you don't necessarily, if you went for a calling plan via Cisco or Microsoft, you don't necessarily get that partnership with your carrier. So if you're wanting to do anything that needs any kind of flexibility, then you might struggle a little bit. Calling plan will allow you to enable dial tone for your PSTN users, but it's not necessarily going to start looking at how to integrate other things. If you've got anything else that might need doing, or how to manipulate numbers, it's normally done fairly simplistically. So then you don't necessarily get the ability to be flexible with your solution, and then you also don't really get the choice about any kind of different cost benefits either. So you can't necessarily go back to a provider that you've worked with for a long time, that you've maybe got some good rates with. You can't necessarily go and use those with those calling plans. So you kind of you go in with Cisco, you go in with Microsoft, and you port your numbers, or you do your new numbers, and you can get it going that way. When it comes to the operator connects, or the direct routing as a service, or the cloud connects with Cisco, or even local gateways of Cisco, you then open up the options, and you provide yourself with a sort of wider set of features and a wider set of possibilities, and probably also a wider set of possibilities to make some cost saves in terms of aggregation and consolidation, that kind of stuff. So they if you were to look at some of these on the surface, they would probably show that they've got different levels of functionality and features. But I think the best thing that can be had is if you want to do something that is even vaguely sort of scaled or complex, it's probably a good idea to get a partner involved. When you get the partner involved, you're then into your operator connect or direct routing space.
And to some extent, I guess that speaks right to that migration plan we were talking about earlier on, right? Like if you're already well positioned to just kind of say everything that existed can go away, and now Teams, the dial pad's going to be active, and you can make an outside call, not to another Teams user. But outside of that, everything else you're accustomed to isn't going to work the same way, or isn't necessarily available. But when you're getting into these other kinds of integrations, what we're talking about, just so that I kind of put a frame around this is like, I've got integration into a third-party contact center solution. I've got integration in or specific device requirements on site because we're in a hospital, or we've got non-Teams user endpoints that are required to be powered in a warehouse. We've got devices. You mentioned warehousing. So you're talking like overhead paging, alerting, door unlocking, like all this kind of analog stuff that's in there. Are there other use cases like that sort of pop off the page as, this is where you're sort of disqualified from using the simple attached calling plans?
Yeah, I think the big one that definitely comes to mind, especially based on where people are looking at the moment, it is contact center. But actually, contact center has probably come on a little way. So for instance, you can actually use some contact center with some calling plan type numbers. But again, you're a little bit restricted unless you can kind of have a partner that can help you do some of that sort of stuff. So there's still manipulations that you might want to be doing in the contact center world. But I mean, Microsoft, for instance, has built up some good ones. So you can have contact center via API, and you can have call recording via API. So it does improve your kind of your scope of what you can achieve for those calling plans. But there's still a lot of things like legacy telephony systems that you might want to integrate, like you mentioned, tannoy systems, speakers, radio systems even, and you'd see a lot of these kind of things as you start to step out of like office environments. The minute you get into maybe some of the healthcare, some of the manufacturing, you start to jump into some scenarios whereby, yes, you've got these other systems, and it's not necessarily that they're deemed legacy, if you know what I mean. They might be using analogs, or they might be using ISDNs and those kind of things, but they're still very much active and still very much used and need to be a part of the solution. So those ones definitely come to mind.
Got it. So really anywhere where you've got employees and workflows that sort of fall outside of information work is generally where you're looking for integration into other kind of endpoints, other devices, other workflows.
Yeah, exactly. Like you say, you've got the ability to be offloading that via the cloud, via different partners. You've got the ability to integrate that in via direct routing, and you've got the ability to do some of that also via SIP gateway on the Teams front at least.
Gotcha. So you mentioned two things and you don't need to beat these to death, but you mentioned Operator Connect and direct routing, or direct routing, as they say over there in pure IP land, right? Us Americans. Can you just describe the differences quickly for anybody who's like, and these are Microsoft integration opportunities, Operator Connect and direct routing. Can you just give me the basic high level?
Yeah, for sure. So we were just talking about calling plans. They were really the first that came out. Calling plans were even available back when it was Skype Online, before it even turned into Teams. But the first thing to happen with that move from Skype into Teams was direct routing. It was quite a painful thing to be doing in Skype, but in Teams, all of a sudden, you were able to do more. So you were, as we talked about some of the limitations of calling plan, sticking with Microsoft, not having a PSTN partner, some limited functionality sets. It's like they ripped the lid off that with direct routing. They immediately said, right, you can have direct routing. It's the entire feature set. You can do whatever manipulations you want on your SBCs. You can integrate those directly into the cloud. You can integrate with other systems, other phone systems, other contact centers, and you can have full control over the environment. So immediately you went from quite a limited feature set into direct routing that gave you the entire feature set, really. And it's kind of fairly limitless in terms of what you can do with that. But the downside of that was that calling plan was very simple to implement, and direct routing was comparatively very, very difficult to implement. You kind of go from users contacting the cloud directly in calling plans to users potentially bouncing their media through SBCs on site, and you're having to control different networks and having to make sure that your SBCs were talking to the cloud. And so there's lots of firewall rules and lots of different paths you can take to actually make that work. So a lot of people struggled with direct routing, firstly from the perspective of the different media paths that came about, and there's different versions of direct routing as a result of that. And then secondly, really in terms of their environments, their networks, their security, they really had to look at the full sort of stack on that to work out where that was going to work. And then even back then, say sort of 2019 time, direct routing was quite new to the market. You had to do a lot of that in PowerShell. And again, unless you were from a Microsoft background, the PowerShell made it quite difficult. And really, if you were one of the sort of early adopters of direct routing, trying to do direct routing at scale was extremely difficult unless you really knew that PowerShell. People who did it, it was great. But yeah, there were some fairly heavy drawbacks in terms of knowledge there. So what Microsoft did is, as if you imagine calling plan first, which was limited. The second one was direct routing, which gave you everything, but was quite difficult. With the third part, they struck a kind of happy medium. So the third one was Operator Connect, and so it was based upon a little bit of calling plan and a little bit of direct routing. So you, as the two types of PSTN mechanisms have progressed, they kind of got closer to each other in terms of their functionality, and Operator Connect just slotted in there. But the benefit that Operator Connect had was that you weren't limited by what Microsoft were offering you direct. You could now go to your partner, but you weren't limited by a direct routing knowledge and setup, because the partner could now via API push all of this PSTN functionality straight into your teams. And so it gave you the benefits. So you were able to get the best prices for things. You were able to get the best availability of coverage. Still work with the partners that you were happy with working with, but the experience required, or really the understanding of teams under the hood, was quite dramatically reduced. You sort of go into your team's admin center, the partner pushes in your numbers, and you need to attach them to various different accounts. So it's quite a drastic difference to direct routing.
Are there use cases? I mean, is this an improvement on, or there are use cases that are still definitely direct routing because you need to do something that's more complicated or sort of outside of the UI that you now get from Microsoft? So there's still a place for direct routing.
Yeah. So it was always deemed that direct routing was kind of here to stay, and Operator Connect was really proposing another easier sort of option, whereas direct routing has always been known as the fully functional sort of version of the feature set. So there are some requirements if you're wanting to do things with extensions, to retain extensions, then you're a little bit better off in direct routing. But there are ways around it in Operator Connect too. And again, if you want to have full control of your environment, I think is probably the best way of thinking about direct routing. If for whatever reason, you maybe have the IT team sat there, you maybe have some of the kit sat there that you want to sweat some of those assets, yeah, direct routing could work well with you. And especially if you want to then control that interface, maybe between, you've got a certain type of contact center, you want to control that interface between your enterprise voice and your contact center, then again, yeah, direct routing is your mechanism there. But as direct routing matured a little bit, there actually became different versions of direct routing too. So direct routing on-premise, it would be if you had your own SBC and you were using it however you wanted to use it, for PSTN, for analogs, for whatever integration you wanted. But along the way became almost like a forerunner to Operator Connect, which was direct routing as a service. So many different carriers and partners started putting direct routing into their clouds and offering it as a service back to customers. And really, if you were to take that service, side by side with Operator Connect, there's very little difference. We were running that service for a long time, and now we predominantly run Operator Connect because people like the easy ability to turn it up quickly. But some people tend to move from direct routing as a service across to Operator Connect more for just a consistency perspective for their IT. But there's really no service benefit of doing that. There is from on-prem with the hardware, but those two versions, there's not a great deal of difference.
Guy, well, so in my background, and we didn't get a chance to talk about this at the open of the call, but I was one of the founding partners of a company called Evolve IP back in 2007, and there's some presence in the UK, so you may know them. But when we were at the early days of hosted VoIP, hosted IP PBX, whatever it was, there was a couple of use cases that were just always troublesome. Right. And the one that always comes to mind literally is like the receptionist that's been at the business for 10 years, or the assistant to the CEO is the one employee with the opportunity to derail the entire project. Are these use cases that are still somewhat problematic, kind of in the Teams, or Zoom, or Cisco WebEx ecosystem? Like, how do you account for that seat, the call coverage position?
Yeah, so I suppose focusing on Teams, there's a couple of different functions that kind of fill that gap. Is it still a scenario? Yes, I would say what it is, but maybe I can explain a little bit. So, like in Teams, you have like a boss admin function. That's what everyone used to call it. It's called delegation in Teams. So you can quite successfully, if you were to combine delegation in Teams for the voice side of things, you can control someone's number, both calls in and out, and you can see their call histories and kind of control their phone like a sort of secretary manager sort of scenario. And then because it's a Microsoft ecosystem, you can combine that with other exchange mechanisms to control their calendar and their Outlook. And so it kind of becomes a pretty decent kind of boss admin type function. Where some of that is a little bit challenged is that if people are in the mindset that they want to achieve that on a physical phone, it does it. It just doesn't really do it quite the same as the traditional phones. I think they had a bit of a foresight, if you like, in terms of some of the hardwares that they created here. They created lots of phones with lots of sort of sidecars and buttons and things, and Teams has been getting there, but never really is quite focused. So I'd say Boss Admin's great if you want to switch into the software side of things and get a headset and try and control things that way. But some of those people that I think are then not quite so willing to make the jump struggle a little bit with that side. And then that kind of also goes on for the front of house. That has definitely been an area that was a little bit more of a challenge, because you can say to some front of house type roles, jump to a headset. You can get a wireless headset. It's probably, you can walk around whilst you're on the phone. You've got various touch options on the sides of the headsets, and it's great. But if you've got it probably is more into how many kind of calls you're fronting via that service. So if you're sort of a low to medium sort of touch point in terms of the calls, probably what Teams offers you is okay. The phones are all right if you want to have one there. They don't quite light up in the sort of the busy lights.
My front line, back line, busy. Yeah,
not quite as good with from that perspective. But from being able to field calls, you can do it quite successfully with Teams. But it's sometimes struggles a little bit if you want a sort of a medium to high sort of touch point. You're wanting to move through those calls really quickly and get drag and drops and push them around very quickly. But that space did open up a little bit. So for instance, there was a lot of third-party systems back on Skype. Some of those same providers came through into Teams, and now there's actually quite a few different companies providing those services. They effectively do like an overlay. So rather than necessarily use your Teams client, you can get a new overlay for your front of house. They can customize it how they want. They can get their drag and drop. They can see things happening, and they can make it work a little bit better. But still software orientated. I still feel like if they want to stick with those physical phones with rows of sidecars, then they might be a little bit hesitant to kind of jump into the solution. Because interestingly, those guys that then started doing those kind of solutions were back in the sort of traditional systems. They were different companies that were doing that to contact center. But what you saw was that with that space kind of combined a little bit. So they're using the APIs, similar APIs into Teams, and so there's companies out there that are doing the contact center side, because they also need a sort of slightly different overlay into Teams for a contact center orientated role, and the front of house for those roles too. So it's kind of an interesting space that kind of combined a little bit in Teams.
Well, let's, in the interest of time, let me rapid fire a couple questions just around some features that are still in my mind on this. You mentioned contact center. There's some basic stuff that you can do in call queues in Teams. So the question simply is, is that a capable product, or are you looking for an integrated third party? And if there are integrated third parties, is there a certification program that Microsoft goes through with that, much like Operator Connect?
Yes, absolutely. So to start with, on the team side of things, with the queue side of things. So When it comes to queues, the thing that was missing a little bit in Teams was the feeling of being part of a team. So you could create hunt groups in Teams for a long time now, auto attendance. You could fire calls at different people, but it was quite hard for them to understand, who picked up the call, and why is the call ringing me and not someone else? What is the status of my team? And those ones back on Skype, they always used to get called informal contact centers. It was like the first step on the ladder towards contact center. And that's really the one that they've taken out with Teams queues. So Microsoft have leveraged all the capability that was already there, but just reworked the interface a little bit so that users can have that feeling of a team. They have another little app on the side of Teams. It shows them the calls that are coming in, who's taking them, who's online, and how the sort of team is operating. So it gives you a different interface into the queue, but it also gives that sort of supervisory type function. It starts to bring that in a little bit. So you kind of get an agent sort of supervisor view, because you start to see some statistics. So it's the first time really that you could start to have some light SLAs and some light call reporting. It's never going to be like a full-on contact center seeing, times in various different queues and that kind of stuff, and a lot of heavy information on drop rates or answer rates. But it gives you the first part of this. I think it's quite perfectly pitched for internal teams, for instance, within companies, maybe like IT service desks, that kind of stuff, that they're not customer facing. They don't necessarily need all that. They don't even really want to run agent software to get the full contact center experience, but they do need some OLAs, and they need to see some information, and need to work as a team. And it makes that kind of brilliant. And really, for the price point that you pay for your license uplift, there isn't really anything else out there that would really sort of go toe to toe with it. The thing where that stops is it's definitely not an omni-channel contact center. It's calls only. That it's never really been identified or being pointed at being anything other than that. So the minute that you get into omni-channel contact center, so you're wanting to kind of fold in all these different workflows for maybe SMS, for emails, for IM, those web chat, those kind of things, you're immediately getting into like a third party space. And there are multiple third parties out there, because Microsoft did set up a framework about how you can go about that. So using their APIs. And then additionally, I think it as well as the omni-channel part, there's definitely a functionality that I think starts to breach that gap and push you over that gap. And I think it's skills-based routing. You can kind of fudge a little bit of skills-based routing, but that's mostly at the heart of a lot of contact centers. So getting into that sort of space, you definitely need to start looking at third-party tools. And so what Microsoft did is they had a sort of 3-tier system, if you like. They had the first tier on that. It's called Connect, Extend, Unify. It's just really recently changed. I think it used to be called Power at the top. But so from a Connect perspective, where they've started with that is it's a combination of being a SIP-orientated contact center and some API. So it'll be looking between the contact center that you've got implemented. It'll be SIP trunked back into Teams, whichever mechanism you do that, but it will use some of the API to start looking at the presence of your Teams users back and forth to be able to have a more seamless integration. And it still comes with having an app in Teams, which is essentially a web app that goes into Teams that gives you your agent sort of supervisor functionality. But it does give you the ability of being at that level. If there's anything that the API from Microsoft doesn't support, you can do it in SIP. So it's kind of leveraging direct routing, if you like. You've got the full feature set. You can do all your modifications in direct routing that you want to do. But then if you were to take that the next step, which is this sort of area of the market that expanded quite rapidly, particularly maybe in the last 12 months, 12 to 18 months, I think, is the extend level. And that one is getting away from a SIP-orientated contact center directly into API. So you're utilizing calling plans or Operator Connect or direct routing. It doesn't matter how you're getting your numbers, because your contact center is picked up for the first time when the call hits Teams. So the call gets into Teams, the API grabs the call and it can start processing it. You can send it off to your IVRs. You can do whatever you want to skills based route it, that kind of stuff. And that area expanded quite rapidly. There's lots of different companies coming to the fore with that. Some of the ones that were there in Skype contact center came through. As I mentioned, some of the companies that were looking more at operator consoles came through into contact center too. And so there's a lot of different options out there for you to be able to do that. And then more recently, the third tier in terms of the contact center framework has been Unify. So that generally was not only an API-based contact center, but was sat right in the middle of Azure, utilizing all that Azure has to offer it. And that's the bit that's changed a little bit lately, because Microsoft have made some announcements about being able to start connecting contact centers into Azure rather than necessarily into Teams. So it kind of opens up some different mechanisms. That's the path that Dynamics, for instance, would take, going into Azure rather than necessarily into Teams. So again, it kind of adds another option. So, out there, you can go at SIP, you can go at API into Teams, and then potentially API into Azure.
What were the three names again?
So you got Connect as the SIP, Extend as the API, and Unify as the API into Azure eventually.
And we should think about Connect as basically, this is the upper right magic quadrant CCaaS providers who have an integrate. Many of them have an integration into, via SIP into Teams. Your second category on the Extend, these are sort of the native tools. And you'll correct me, maybe they're in the third category, but this is like Content Guru, Anywhere 365, and right around there. They would be names people would know. And then has anyone sort of achieved this? So basically, I'm looking at the third category, the Unify, as basically an Extend partner who happens to host that solution inside of Azure.
Yeah, largely. There's a little bit more to it, but I don't believe, I could be corrected, but I don't believe there's any Unify partners just yet. It's always been one that's been coming. The model's been around there for a long time. But really, that extended version took a long time to get off the ground. There was a lot of work by Microsoft and the partners getting all those APIs ready for that kind of environment. I think the other point that's maybe interested on those three different options is that the Connect level, you might be able to see that kind of level being not only connectivity into Microsoft, but you could see that connecting into other platforms too. So, if you are running different platforms, that might be why you would choose a SIP oriented contact center rather than something that's API into Microsoft specifically.
Got you. We're almost out of time, and I want to get to some fun. So I'm going to ask these super quick. One, I'm a mess as a Microsoft administrator, and my directories, you talk about directories being at the basis of this, like, is cleanup something that has to happen before you get this done?
Not necessarily. You might find that you kind of have a more painful time when it actually comes to your kind of go live and migration dates. So that I think that there's a few things that you could do that will make your life a lot easier. The first one of those is, if you ever had any Skype for Business, be very careful. Skype for Business and Teams use the same attributes. So if you've still got Skype knocking them out, or you never removed Skype fully from your environment, you could find that you've got those, and you can't put Teams and Skype at the same time unless you go through quite a lot of other different, more complex sort of processes. So something to be careful of. The second thing is, and that's for an IT admin. The second thing is just for your own sanity when users start seeing Teams. If your directory services have got lots of cosmetic numbers sat in it that are going to be incorrect based on what you're about to deploy in Teams, definitely change that, because it causes a lot of it'll cause a lot of pain to your service desk. They'll get all these calls coming in saying, I'm ringing these numbers and they're not working, or I see these numbers and they're not working. It can be cosmetic, but still cause you quite a lot of pain. And then the third one, I think, is the biggest one for me, is usage locations. If you say, for instance, if you've maybe not kept up with the correct usage locations to match where the users are in terms of their country, when you come to try and associate a number to a user in like an operator connect scenario, if you haven't got your user locations correct, it won't show you the list. It won't allow you to associate the number. So that's definitely a big one. They're all easy to fix those.
Yeah, yeah. It's just hygiene at the end of the day. But these are the kind of things like if you're not leveraging the directories for anything other than authentication, then all of a sudden you're like, wow, I have to start thinking about where people are, So the other thing is this introduces you into the ecosystem. So this will kind of be our last question before we get to the fun, right? Which is, what I mean, everything's about AI right now. And obviously Microsoft has their own play now. And I know we're over here having a very kind of practical, how do we get legacy communications into this enterprise collaboration platform? But Copilot's floating out here. Are there use cases where you're starting to get asked like how Copilot plays with enterprise voice? Is there a path or is that a coming? Like how do I think about rationalizing these almost like two ends of the Microsoft Teams spectrum, right?
Yeah, within Copilot, there is some functionality that works with Teams Phone. It kind of feels like a bit of an evolution from what people have been enjoying with meetings. So it's the ability to kind of like take notes on, PSTN calls the same as you would do on a meeting and get the summaries and stuff like that. So I haven't seen many people want to take a lot of decisions based on that alone. I guess if you had a lot of different or a lot of roles in your company, whereby that was a thing where people were spending a lot of time on PSTN calls that needed some of that summarization to help their role, then it could be. But I think the bigger play really for Copilot at this point in time is probably the meeting orientated stuff. That tends to be the stuff that people really look at. I'd say from a Teams Phone, it's more about the Teams premium license, which was the queues element that we were looking at. Probably the AI in terms of Teams Phone, I think would come in more when you see it in play on call recording of the Teams policy-based call recording and the contact centers that you're bringing in via API. Those two, I think, are the two areas to watch on this. I've seen some pretty impressive things, particularly on call recording that's out there right now on its ability with AI, but maybe the AI is also, emerging on Teams Phone.
Fantastic. All right, two fun questions, and then I'm going to let you go because I promised I was going to have you up by the top of the hour. Number one, and what's your kind of what's on your end table? What are you reading right now, business or otherwise? You have a book recommendation for our listeners?
I have got a book recommendation. I was just seeing if it was behind me. But it's basically about I don't know if you've seen on television about ancient aliens. The whole yeah. So it's one of those books, and I forget the title now. But yeah, I kind of read.
You can email me afterwards. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
All right. So I love that. Let's stay with the aliens. All right. We're going to have even more fun. This is a question I ask everybody. There's some dystopian future that happens to us, whatever that is. And maybe it's an alien takeover, whatever that is. But at the end of it all, you only have one functioning app on your mobile device, but you get to choose. Which one is it?
I would say this kind of depends upon how life looks as we move forward.
The good news is you get to choose your own dystopian future, so you can tack it together.
There's a few different apps that I use a lot, and I think I sort of go two ways. So if it's if life is going to be good and I can keep my one app to do something that I love, then I'd probably go with the snowboarding app. So I can check out the snow, things like that. If life's going to be bad, I'd go for the torch.
Amen. That's a really good one, and I like it. Well thought out, sir. And we're right up against it. This has been a lot of fun, and I really appreciate your time, Alistair. I appreciate it. This has been a masterclass, I think, in modern voice, but just so that people know how to connect, where can listeners go to learn a little bit more about you? Pure IP, can catch a talk you may give. How do they find out a little bit more?
So a couple of places. You can obviously go to the BCM One Pure IP website. There's a full rundown of all the services that we offer, some of the ones that we've talked about today. Same goes really for LinkedIn on the BCM One front, but also for me personally, feel free to reach out to me, send me a request. We can catch up on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Well, Alistair, I thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. That is a wrap on this episode of the Bridgecast. If today's conversation gave you something to think about, please hit subscribe, leave us a review, share it with your team. And obviously, if you found Alistair as interesting as I did, please check up with him on LinkedIn. And we will see you soon on another episode of the Bridgecast. Listen, if you made it this far, there must have been some good content, or you're just a fan or a relative of mine. In either case, We appreciate you spending your most valuable asset with us, your time. We don't take that lightly. We'd also like to say one more time that we're appreciative of Bridgepoint Technologies and their belief and sponsorship of this show. We hope that if you or someone you know is thinking about your company's digital transformation, or simply the next IT project that you may not have the resources, budget, or time to get to, I'm sure that Bridgepoint, one of the country's fastest growing technology advisory and procurement firms, can help. Check out bridgepointtechnologies.com. Don't forget the E on Bridgepoint, or simply reach out to me at Skinka, SKINKA, at bpt3.net. Also take a minute, please, if you would, to give us a 5-star review on your favorite platform. It helps give us the visibility to reach other people like you. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Bridge. I'm Scott Kinka, and until next time, there's a lot of noise out there in business and in life. Do what you can to be the signal. Thanks.